I think he had a lot of heart and a lot of compassion.
Losing a legend, we look at Robin Williams' life and the depression he battled to the end. Aerial lifeline, water and solar lamps airdropped to stranded refugees. Crossroads for Life. We follow the footsteps of cross-country trekking life advocates. And Ebola takes a missionary. The Spanish priest treated for Ebola infection has died. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 12th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. As we look at your news now, a Spanish religious order is expressing condolences after a missionary priest who is being treated for Ebola died early today. The death comes during a worldwide debate over who should receive experimental treatments. Our Wyatt Goolsby joins us now with more. Wyatt?
Brian, the Spanish missionary Father Miguel Pajares was one of 3 to receive an experimental serum. The 2 others are Americans who are both in stable condition. So today, health authorities have been debating the right way to distribute or even use experimental drugs.
The global death toll now stands at more than 1,000 people. The worst Ebola outbreak in history has prompted some African governments to ask for unproven drugs in an attempt to relieve the suffering. This morning, the World Health Organization declared the use of those drugs ethical if used properly.
So it is very important to not give false hope to anybody that Ebola can be treated now. This is absolutely not the case. What we rely on now is proper implementation of infection prevention and control.
So far, however, the WHO has sidestepped the key question of how to decide who should get the limited drugs. 2 American aid workers and Father Pajares were treated with ZMapp, a new drug never before tested on humans. Whether the drug had any effect on the 75-year-old priest is still unclear. Before being evacuated, Pajares worked for the San Juan de Dios Hospital Order, a Spain-based Catholic humanitarian group, and was helping treat people with Ebola in Liberia when he became ill.
On behalf of our order, we want to feel united and express our condolences to the family of Brother Miguel and to the family of San Juan de Dios. The hospital order gives thanks for all the support received from public administrations and society in general.
Meanwhile, the wider debate over the ethics of using experimental drugs continues. Experts from Georgetown University weighed in this morning, saying the process could be more open.
You need a transparent process for deciding. And certainly I think African healthcare workers who've put themselves on the front line of risk would be very high in that priority standing.
Members of the World Health Organization also say they're encouraging more debates and discussion on this issue. They say the more information about how sick patients respond to the experimental drugs will offer clues to treating others. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. Let's dig a little deeper into this. Dr. Kevin Donovan, the director of the Pellegrino Center for Clinical Bioethics at Georgetown University Medical Center, is with us. This experimental drug to treat Ebola is in very limited supply. The World Health Organization isn't saying who should get it. What do you think?
Well, I think that what people have to realize is the drug itself is not a recognized treatment yet. It's an experiment. It's at this point an uncontrolled experiment. And even if we knew that it was safe, which we don't, even if we knew it was effective, which we don't, there are only a handful of doses left, and they've all been dispensed with. They're in Liberia now.
So the idea that they're being given to people whose job it is to treat Ebola patients, is that significant?
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is I think that those who have received it, there's good reason for them to have received it. I think those who have put themselves on the front lines in order to care for others should be doing so with the expectation that if they get into trouble, we're going to reach out and try and help them. It also makes sense in terms of trying to keep those who are doing the work in the front lines, keeping them healthy, and then at the same time letting others know that if they were to come and try and help and run into trouble, become infected, that we would try and help them as well.
Well, what are the ethical considerations, though, of giving an untested drug to a person in the first place?
That's the real problem here. There's so much pressure to try and find some sort of treatment for this disease for which there is no known and approved treatment, that we will desperately want to try anything. But if it were to be effective, we wouldn't be sure of that just by giving it out in uncontrolled circumstances. These things really do require careful research protocols in order to know once again, whether they're safe and whether they're effective.
In a more practical sense, how do you think the medical community, the world medical community, should be responding to this crisis?
Well, your question is perfect because it should be a very practical response. What is needed right now, the one thing we know makes a difference, is providing the means to protect people who are trying to treat patients, to use public health measures to keep the infection from spreading in those areas. Those things we know how to do, and this is what Africa needs the most. That's the kind of help that can be offered and received.
And it's going to take a worldwide effort. Do you think that that's beginning to come together? Because this thing needs to be addressed.
It needs to be addressed desperately. We're seeing those in the United States starting to make these efforts, and people are going over there to help and bringing supplies. Even the Chinese have promised $5 million worth of protective gear.
All right, Dr. Kevin Donovan, thank you for your insight. We appreciate it. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Police will not announce the name of an officer involved in a shooting that left an unarmed teen dead over the weekend near St. Louis. This comes after 3 tense days in Ferguson, Missouri. Police have had to use tear gas to disperse crowds and stop looting and rioting over this weekend's shooting of an unarmed teen by a police officer. Federal investigators are trying to figure out what led to the shooting and if it was justified. Meanwhile, the teen's father is asking people to bring an end to the chaos.
I understand everybody have their own different pains and how they dealing with the situation because they have losses too. But I need all us to come together and do this right, the right way.
Police originally planned to name the officer involved in the shooting, but that changed after the department received some threats against the officer. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is trying to cling to power as international support begins to flow toward another political leader. Iran is the latest country to support someone other than Maliki as Iraq's new prime minister. This after Iraq's newly elected president announced Haider al-Abadi is his pick for the next prime minister, not Maliki. Maliki has put security forces on alert, but he denies trying to stay in office using force.
What I am scared of is that al-Qaeda gangs, the Islamic State group, and insurgents might try to make use of the current tension on the pretext of defending al-Maliki or some others.
The U.S. has also announced its support for Maliki's rival. In northern Iraq, ISIS militants continue to terrorize minorities. Some are now fleeing to Syria to escape the violence. Men, women, and children with only the clothing on their backs are all traveling hours to take refuge along riverbanks in the region. Meanwhile, ISIS fighters are making new gains in their deadly march across Iraq. Central Command says U.S. forces successfully conducted an airstrike today against an ISIS mortar position north of Sinjar. The U.S. could send as many as 75 more military advisors to Iraq. Also, this is significant. For the first time, the U.S. is providing weapons directly to Kurdish forces to help fend off ISIS fighters. And the British Air Force is helping send some relief to trapped, frightened refugees. Crews recently made a second humanitarian supply drop at Mount Sinjar. They dropped thousands of containers of water along with solar lamps that can also be used to recharge mobile phones. The Vatican is asking Islamic leaders to help counter the violence against Christians in Iraq. The Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue is asking Muslim leaders to denounce what it calls unspeakable criminal acts. Many Christians have been killed or kidnapped since the rise of the Islamic State over the past several months. Pope Francis dispatched his personal envoy to Iraq earlier this week, showing solidarity with persecuted Christians there. And late today, the Knights of Columbus announced a new relief fund to help Christians and other minorities facing persecution. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson will join us tomorrow night to talk about the fund and tell us how we can help. From celebrity friends to loyal fans, the world reacts tonight to the death of comic actor Robin Williams. Kathryn Zeltner reports.
Tonight, the light has dimmed for one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Award-winning actor and comedian Robin Williams committed suicide. He was found at his home in Northern California.
The male subject, who was pronounced deceased by firefighters from the Tiburon Fire Department at 12:02 p.m., has been identified as Robin McLaurin Williams.
It comes after a long battle with drug addiction and depression for years. Williams checked into a rehab center just last month.
The preliminary, and I again say preliminary, results of the forensic examination revealed supporting physical signs that Mr. Williams' life ended from asphyxia due to hanging.
In the wake of his death, mourners are turning to his career for comfort. Williams became a household name as a star in the sitcom Mork and Mindy.
Run for your life, the emotions are coming!
On the big screen, he starred in comedies like The Birdcage, Aladdin, and Mrs. Doubtfire.
My first day as a woman, I'm getting hot flashes.
And he earned critical acclaim for his dramatic roles, like Good Will Hunting, where he won his first and only Oscar. Williams often channeled his talent to help others. He participated in 6 USO tours and co-hosted comic relief performances to help the homeless. In a statement, Williams' wife asked fans not to focus on his death, but his life. A life that includes a body of work that may never again be matched. Kathryn Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Joined by another Kathryn Jean Lopez from National Review Online. Also Dr. Judith Rose Wilson, a clinical manager for behavioral health services at Catholic Charities here in the Archdiocese of Washington. Kathryn, you've written about the man versus the myth. This was an incredibly talented individual. Why not make a myth out of him? What's the danger of that?
Well, he talked about that during his life, how when celebrities die, we make myths out of them. I think what we have to take from the fact that he's died, I'm so struck by the number of people who say this is unbelievable, but it's very believable. He was a man, just like anyone else. And I think what we have to take away from this is, no matter how successful you are, no matter what material wealth you have, you could be feel as alone as the guy on the street corner. And I think that's what we have to take of it. And the second thing I would take from it is, what if every person who ever laughed at a Robin Williams joke prayed for him afterward at the end of the day? I mean, that would be powerful, and we don't do that. We feel like we know them, and yet there's this disconnect or detachment, and there shouldn't be spiritually. So I think we really, as Christians, have to reflect on these things.
So, Judith, you know, we all feel down every once in a while, but talk about the difference between that and depression, deep depression that can lead to something like this.
Well, major depression is a mental health disorder that is suffered by approximately 19 million Americans. It includes symptoms such as sadness, feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, fatigue, sleeplessness, and even suicidal ideations. And at that point is when family members, neighbors, professionals need to really be proactive in getting the individual some help.
This death really hit me hard. He's just a few years older than I am. Like myself, he suffered with substance abuse and some depression. Is there a direct link between substance abuse and depression that you're aware of?
We find that, you know, at Catholic Charities in the mental health clinic that I work, we find that people often self-medicate, utilizing substances to medicate themselves to treat the mental illness. And usually that is not the best means.
Not at all.
So we definitely treat both in our clinic.
Can it add to, substance abuse can actually add to depression?
It definitely does add to the depression, and that's why we take a eclectic approach in treating both the substance abuse and the mental illness.
And Kathryn, just finally, how can we as Catholics look at this issue of depression and the terrible results that can lead to with compassion?
Well, we see so many anonymous men, frankly, the suicide numbers for men are so high, die so often, either publicly or privately, mall shootings and whatnot. I think we have to look at this as an issue of solidarity, where we're really not only reaching out, going to the peripheries of loneliness, as the Pope calls us to, but also praying for people.
Good idea. Kathryn Jean Lopez, Dr. Judith Rose Wilson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, if you're struggling with depression or someone you love perhaps, there is help. You can pick up the phone anytime and call this line, 1-800-273-8255. Coming up, pro-life advocates across the country in all sorts of weather to converge on our nation's capital. And the Pope's departure for Korea now just hours away as the stage is set in Seoul. On this Tuesday, thanks for joining us this evening on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Citing last month's death of a man who was put in a police chokehold, a New York City official is calling for body cameras on police officers. Public advocate Letitia James wants a pilot program to put body-worn cameras on patrol officers in certain New York precincts. A federal judge ordered some patrol officers to wear the cameras for a pilot program in a ruling last year. A police spokeswoman says the department is exploring the feasibility of camera technology, but the president of that city's police union says he wants to see evidence of the camera's effectiveness. Well, some of the fun could be let out of a high-profile party on Martha's Vineyard tomorrow night. President Obama and Hillary Clinton will attend the party, hosted by former Clinton advisor Vernon Jordan. It's the first time Obama and Clinton will be together since the publishing of a critical article on Obama's foreign policy, despite serving as his chief diplomat. In the Atlantic article, Clinton openly criticizes Obama's handling of international affairs. But late today, she reportedly called the president, saying her comments were not an attack on his leadership. Clinton is widely expected to run for president in 2016, but has not yet announced. Wisconsin voters are at the polls today, but Governor Scott Walker doesn't have to worry about a primary challenger. He is running unopposed in the Republican primary. Walker, of course, there was a failed attempt to recall him in 2012 over his labor policy in state unions. Democrat Mary Burke is expected to beat her challenger Brett Holsley and then face Walker in November's general election. The polls show those two in a dead heat. Well, right now, college students are walking across the country to defend life. Our Jason Calvi is walking with them in Maryland tonight. Jason?
Hey, Brian, we were soaked this morning, but thankfully the rain has stopped. But for these young people, it's just part of the mission, really. For 20 years, about 1,000 young people have trekked across the country. It's Crossroads pro-life walk across the country. Step by step, mile by 3,000 miles, these young Catholics are on a mission.
I'm walking for the voiceless, those who don't have any opportunity to say what they want in their life. I'm walking for the dignity and sanctity of all human life.
You can see that message in their shirts and their smiles.
Pope St. John Paul II came to the United States to Denver World Youth Day, and he challenged our generation to be like the apostles, to take the gospel of life to the highways and to the byways.
And so 3 different Crossroads pro-life teams are journeying to D.C. They started in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. They're walking past monuments, fighting blazing heat, and today's downpour.
Oh my gosh, yeah, rain, there's been thunderstorms. Obviously, we don't walk when there's thunder and lightning, but one weekend we had golf ball-sized hail.
So we're out of the rain, we've got the heat on. This is the support van. It goes about 3 miles in front of the walkers, making sure the roads and sidewalks are safe. It's also the on-deck crew, so these people are going to be hitting the streets next. These annual summer walks almost came to an end 2 years ago when 20-year-old Andrew Moore was hit by a car and died.
They would not stop because they knew that's what Andrew would do. Andrew would want to keep walking and keep going.
And so they walk on and pray for life as they go.
Prayer, prayer. The Lord will take care of you. You just got to really trust in God's providence.
And every day they go to Mass, they pray together as a community. Actually, right now they're rushing to get to Mass. I'm kind of slowing it up with our camera here, but they're rushing to get to Mass, just part of their journey. All 3 teams are going to end up right this week at the Capitol. They're going to end at the Capitol, joining together, uniting, and continuing to stand for life. Guys, and back to you, Brian.
All right, thank you, Jason. I'm grateful the rain stopped. Well, anticipation is growing in South Korea for the Pope's visit this week. Pope Francis will begin the journey tomorrow. He will beatify 124 local martyrs from the 18th and 19th centuries. An estimated 10,000 other Catholics were killed by the ruling dynasty during that same period. The Pope is also expected to encourage North and South Koreans to reconcile. About 10% of the 50 million people in the South are Catholic. EWTN News Nightly producer Susie Pinto is en route to Seoul tonight. Alan Holdren joins Pope Francis on the papal plane, leaving from Rome tomorrow. Catch EWTN News Nightly's exclusive Shine the Light reports of the Pope in Korea starting tomorrow here on EWTN. Up next, with school starting, we offer some tips for more productive homework time. And we discuss what kids are being taught about gender identity in public schools. Thank you for joining us on EWTN News Nightly for this 12th of August. I'm Brian Patrick, and back to school means back to the books. EWTN News Nightly's Kathryn Elliott has tips for developing good homework and study habits.
When the school day is over, children still have a lot to do, including their homework. So they need to make the most of their time. Parents can help their kids develop smart and effective study habits. The American Academy of Pediatrics offers these tips. First, schedule plenty of time for homework. Allow children a consistent place to get their work done, whether it's in their room or somewhere else that is quiet, where they won't be distracted. Speaking of distractions, TV and other electronics can really interrupt, so it's best to keep them off throughout the house during this time. But they may need to use the internet for their assignments.
It's a fact of life that kids are using screens more for school,
says pediatrician Dr. Shu. So supervise them. And be sure to let your young learners take breaks to help prevent and alleviate eye, neck, and brain fatigue. Tips to make homework time a productive time. Kathryn Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Kathryn. Of course, as parents, we can set the agenda at home, but in the public schools, kids must respect school rules. Mary Rice Hasson has been researching gender groupthink in public schools here in Washington, D.C. She's a fellow in the Catholic Studies program at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Mary, how is language being used to really mold an agenda in this area of gender identity?
Well, here's the thing, Brian. Parents who have children in the public schools really do have something to worry about here, because increasingly schools are trying to deal with the phenomenon of transgender individuals, whether it's students or faculty, by claiming the language of gender transition, which means they tell students and the school families that they must use the preferred pronouns of the transgender person. But more importantly, the thing that's really troubling from a parental perspective is they offer the explanation. They say there is no more male and female as we know it. People are not male, either male or female. There's a gender spectrum. And so individuals have the right to define for themselves who they really are. Are they male? Are they female? Are they somewhere in between? And so all of a sudden, there's no connection to biological reality, and the schools are enforcing this kind of language on the children, from LA to DC to Massachusetts.
Biological reality. God created man and woman. So how is biology handled in a school like this?
You know, here's what they do. They distinguish between sex and gender, and they say sex is your physical anatomy, it's what you're born with. But gender, who you really are, your identification as a male or a female, or something in between, or none of the above, is something that's completely personal and subjective. But the problem with that is it's a lie. It's not true. It's like saying to the anorexic who looks in the mirror and says, I'm fat. It's like saying, okay, we're going to let you take diet pills and do gastric bypass surgery. That would be a terrible thing to do. But with the transgender individual, instead of helping them to really embrace their bodily reality, there's a willingness to say, you're right. You must be a woman because you feel like a woman. So we'll give you hormones that affect your fertility, and we'll suggest surgery that mutilates your body.
So many Catholic parents send their children to public school, some out of necessity, others out of choice. If you had to, you're a mom, what would you do if your kids went to this school?
Here's what I would do. I would insist that they respect my right as a parent to provide the explanation to the children about what's going on here. Because with the schools insisting that a male teacher who becomes a woman or identifies as a woman is a woman, they're taking away my right to give a fuller explanation to the kids, where I might say, this person believes they're a woman, treat them kindly, treat them charitably, but there's a body person integrity. This person is still a man. So I need to be able to provide that explanation to the children. That's not the school's job.
So we should respect the person.
Absolutely.
But as Catholic parents, we need to teach the values as well.
And teach the truth. We do no one any good by pretending something is what it isn't.
All right, Mary Rice Hasson, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
And thank you for being with us tonight. We hope you'll come back tomorrow. Until then, like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. Watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night and God bless you.